Well, good morning, everyone. And good morning, Demis. I know it's like 1 a.m. in London, so we thank you for your solidarity and actually being jet lagged with us. I hope you're fully caffeinated like the room here in Singapore.
I am.
Good. Demis, let me just start off with, when we talk about AI and DeepMind, this is all about understanding the human brain and actually how it works. How far along are we in that journey? How much do we still not understand about our brains?
So at DeepMind, the way we approach building artificial intelligence is we try and take some inspiration from how the brain works. And what we mean by inspiration, we're not trying to copy how the brain works, but we're sort of looking at the architectures and the algorithms and the representations the brain uses. And then we're trying to get some hints and clues about how the brain produces intelligence. And then we're trying to sort of recreate those capabilities in our machines so that effectively our systems can think and learn for themselves. So there's enough known about the brain that we can do that, but of course, there are many open questions still about how the brain works, but there's enough clues there that it's useful for building artificial intelligence.
I mean, should I look at it in percentage-wise? Are we like 5%, understanding of our brain, or is it like 30%?
I would say, it's probably 20 to 30%, but it's, actually, I think once we build AI, it will be helpful as a tool to finish understanding the brain. But I think that 20–30% is still quite indicative and quite useful. After all, the human brain is the only existence proof we have in the universe that we know of that kind of general intelligence is possible.
I want to talk about biology in a second, but how much do we actually interact with AI in our day-to-day lives without even realizing sometimes?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, artificial intelligence is embedded all around us now. Every time you use your mobile phone, you look at maps to find where you're going, you speak to it with your voice. There's AI underpinning all of those everyday things now. What's recommended that you watch next on Netflix or a streaming service, all of that has aspects of AI underlying those algorithms. So we're touching artificial intelligence pretty much every minute by minute in our daily lives.
I want to talk a little bit about biology. So your system, AlphaFold, is a solution to the protein folding system, a grand challenge in biology for the past 50 years. So why did you choose that thing to work on? Why biology and why now?
So when we started DeepMind back in 2010, AI was, not fashionable like it is now. In fact, it was very much the opposite. It was very difficult even to raise some seed funding. And what we decided to do actually initially was to prove our algorithmic ideas, these ideas about building general learning systems that can learn for themselves directly from data and experience. We started to prove that out on games because it's very convenient as a kind of testing ground for our ideas. So we beat the world champion at Go famously with our program AlphaGo, then chess, and then a video game called StarCraft, strategic game called StarCraft. And the idea was ultimately always to eventually apply those algorithmic ideas to massive real-world challenges, both in commercial challenges, but also in science. And AlphaFold, as you say, was our first big breakthrough in science, where we're able to predict the 3D structure of a protein, which goes a long way to determining what function it does in life and in our bodies. And we're able to predict the 3D structure directly from its one-dimensional genetic sequence, which normally would take years and years of very painstaking experimental work to find, and now we can do it in a matter of seconds.
So Isomorphic Labs is also your new company with a mission to reimagine the entire drug discovery process. What can it achieve that humans can't? Is it pace, or is it actually new discoveries?
Well, we think that AlphaFold is a kind of proof of concept that some of these things, some of these aspects of biology and biochemistry that used to be done painstakingly in the lab, in the wet lab, and take many, many years and be very difficult types of experiments. A lot of those things we think are ready to be tackled computationally or AI first. And we think that it's not just the protein structure, the structure of a protein, which of course is only one small aspect of what you need to do to discover a new drug or cure for a disease. There are many, many other aspects that need to be cracked. But we actually think a lot of those components in that drug discovery process are potentially amenable to computational and AI-first methods. And what we want to do with the new company is kind of accelerate investment in that area and really push that as far as it will go. And I think it could be a very exciting time in the next 5+ years where we might see a kind of revolution in the way some of those steps are tackled much more quickly, and in the end deliver cures far faster than the kind of 10 years average that it takes today.
So is that for the actual drug development or finding the drug, or is it also safety? Because that's usually the process that takes the longest. So can you achieve that quicker to make sure that it's safe, and so maybe cut the trial
potentially
times?
Both those things. So part of it is identifying the right target. Then it's sort of designing the right compound, the right chemical compound to bind to that target. And then also testing its properties, so making sure it's not toxic and has the right solubility and the right thermal properties and so on. And we think that AI could potentially predict many of those properties. So then when it goes to the point where it's going to clinical trial, then you have a much higher confidence and percentage chance of getting through that clinical trial. And of course, it would also accelerate that whole discovery process as well by potentially many years.
Demis, people who work in technology or like health tech often say about a culture clash between software developers that are interactive, want to go fast, and maybe drug development, which has more checks and balances. How do you make sure that there's not a culture clash?
Yeah, no. So I think, of course, there are many reasons for medicine and pharma to be like it is, and obviously, you have to carefully check all of your experiments before you obviously distribute anything. But I think there are many steps in the early discovery process before you're anywhere close to getting to market or doing the clinical trials and regulations that come with that and all those kinds of things, where it's purely sort of scientific in the lab. And it's those steps that I think we're looking to see if they can be accelerated and enhanced and helped with very sophisticated, deep computational and AI methods, much like AlphaFold.
Google's previous pharma foray, have struggled. I'm thinking of the partnership with Sanofi Aventis fizzling in 2019. There was, the contact lenses that could actually check whether you had diabetes or not. What will you do differently with this project?
Yeah, this is a very different sort of project to other things. Actually, I think that's going on in pharma in general, where we're really focusing on the computational side of things. That's our expertise from DeepMind. That's what the expertise of the new company, Isomorphic Labs, will have, is really doubling down on this idea of modeling aspects of biology. How much of biology can we computationally model? Can we understand with information systems? I think at its most fundamental level, biology is an information processing system. You can obviously DNA has often been called as a sort of code, really like a code. But I think many other aspects of biology, our cells, proteins, and other things can actually best be understood as information processing systems. And if that's the right hunch, then a lot of these systems might be modelable and predictable with machine learning methods. So it's a really different kind of approach to, say, building devices or building wet labs and other more traditional approaches to things like drug discovery and medicine.
Demis, are people at DeepMind concerned about the powerful AI that you're creating being controlled by a single entity? Do you feel comfortable with that? And what are the checks and balances that you want to make sure are always in place?
Yeah, we're very comfortable. I mean, we've been now part of the Alphabet group for nearly 8 years. We're very proud of that. They give us a ton of support. We're an independently sort of run subsidiary, so we have our own roadmap, our own research agenda, our own culture, and all of that is, and obviously we're based in London, and so we have a lot of freedom to operate how we think best to sort of deliver our mission of solving intelligence and using it to advance science and benefiting humanity. And so we're sort of laser focused on that. And we sort of see it as the best of all worlds, really. So we get to still sort of be like a nimble, I still regard us as a startup, even though we're a dozen years in. We still have plenty to do in our mission, but we're backed by, this really big entity, supportive entity. And another thing is we have a lot of collaborations with Google on the commercial side in terms of our technology being embedded now in hundreds of Google products. I mean, pretty much any Google product you use will have some aspect of DeepMind's technology under the hood. And in terms of sort of ethics questions and other things, we've always had the ethical use of AI as a fundamental building block of DeepMind from the very beginning. we planned for success. So we thought, even back in 2010, when no one else pretty much was working on AI, we already envisaged how powerful the technology could be, an extraordinarily powerful technology with extraordinary opportunities, but also some risks that come with that. And so we had that in mind from the beginning, and we've embedded that in everything we do. You know, we have internal ethics committees and other things that check and look through with the researchers in partnership with them every research that we work on and deploy. And Alphabet and Google itself has also publicly declared their sort of AI principles, which we were a big part of helping draft, and obviously we subscribe to those principles as well.
Are there lessons to be learned actually from the social media industry about risks and reputation? And is there anything holding AI back? Are we, do we fear it, or are we curious about it?
Yeah, I think, if you look at obviously it's a very different field from the social media field and industry, but there are some lessons there, which is I think we should take on board about building very powerful technologies, perhaps building them with good intent in mind and some good theories at the outset of what they would be capable of. But then when actually you realize your ambitions, you also need to think at that point that before it happens, what the unintended consequence might be. And I think for powerful things, like social media, but also like AI, you need to think about that ahead of time. I don't think it's a good idea to sort of, to use an anachronism of move fast and break things. That's maybe appropriate for things like games or apps or, things like that. But I think for when you're talking about powerful new technologies and powerful new science, I think a scientific method and a scientific approach of sort of thoughtful reflection, thoughtful progress, critiquing everything you do, submitting your work to peer review, outside peer review, which is obviously the norm scientific method. All of those things help science to be very robust, and why it works so brilliantly. And I think the scientific method is more the correct method and approach, I think, for building these types of powerful technologies.
How much can AI actually contribute to climate goals?
Yeah, so actually I've just come back from COP26, probably like many of you, and I was talking there about the many ways I think AI can actually be a really big contributor to helping with the climate crisis. I think there's at least three ways. One is optimizing existing infrastructure. So we did that already at Google, where we reduced the amount of cooling, the cooling systems within the Google data centers used by about 30%. We've now generalized that to, and it's available on Google Cloud, for all building controls. And we're running a bunch of pilots, and it looks like we can save 20 to 30% of the energy used by an office building through more efficiently controlling the air conditioning and heating and so on. So, that could be huge if you think about rolling that out globally. It's about 6% of the world's emissions are building office emissions. So, and I think AI could optimize many existing infrastructure, which would almost be for free because it's just software on top of existing infrastructure. Secondly, I think it's like making better predictive models of climate and the weather. We've just built a rainfall prediction system that's better than anything the UK Met Office has. And then thirdly, it would be accelerating new technologies. So things like material science, also protein, the work we do on proteins could help potentially, and things even like fusion and plasma containment we've worked on. So I think all of those three areas could be accelerated by AI.
Demis, what can contribute most to the acceleration of AI adoption and capability? And I don't know whether, for example, for AlphaFold or Isomorphic Labs, you have a time frame on which you want to, solve certain drug situations. Yeah,
we always have sort of near-term plans, medium plans, and then very long-term plans. We've had that from the beginning. We had a kind of 20-year plan when we started with DeepMind, which we're about halfway through now, and on time. The same with Isomorphic. With AlphaFold, we've already open sourced that and released it free for any use, commercial or academic, because we felt that was actually the quickest way to get the maximum benefit for the scientific community and humanity. And we actually partnered up with the European Bioinformatics Institute, based in Cambridge, and they build the best database tools for the biological research community. And we hosted all the predictions for all 20,000 proteins in the human body. So that's the human proteome, it's called. It's sort of equivalent to the human genome, but with proteins. And that's all available along with 20 other model organisms. So over 300 structure predictions are on that database. And we've been really amazed and pleasantly sort of surprised by how quickly the entire biological research community has adopted that. In fact, 300,000 scientists have already accessed the database, which I think there's only about 300,000 biological researchers in the world. So perhaps every single one of them has already looked up their favorite protein in our database. So it's amazing to see that kind of impact. And then Isomorphic is going to sort of look more carefully, specifically at drug discovery process. So things like small molecule design, binding affinities, so more directly to do with the drug discovery process, whereas AlphaFold was more about the fundamental biological research questions.
Demis, a final question, how does AI, first of all, fit in the metaverse, and what's your AI utopia in 5-10 years?
Yeah, so AI and metaverse is actually a funny thing because I feel it's gone full circle with the metaverse. I used to start my career before DeepMind designing computer games and writing AI for computer games. And obviously, the metaverse is the sort of next evolution of gaming in some ways. And I think AI's got a big place to play there in terms of creating compelling avatars or characters within the metaverse world that you can converse with and interact with and perhaps advance stories and other things with. So I think actually there's a huge amount that AI is going to bring to the metaverse. And ultimately, my hope for AI is that we'll use it to, over the next decade, we'll start seeing it really materially contributing to some of the biggest grand challenges facing us as a society, from disease to climate.
Demis, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.